sexual violence and the premeditated desire to rape and humiliate and then murder Israeli women and on occasion men was truly monstrous. The chief pathologist's office was extremely helpful in this regard. Much of the photographic evidence can only point to one thing, which was that the terrorists wanted to enjoy themselves as they were murdering, and they wanted to take sexual pleasure from the process, and that they did on pretty much every one of the massacre sites. There is evidence of sexual of rape, essentially, prior to murder. And so that is another hugely depraved aspect of it. And by the way, one of the other things that was very depraved, which carried on for 6 months afterwards, was the International Women's Commission of the United Nations refusing to denounce this.
Staying absolutely silent.
They were absolutely silent. And so they put, these people who were essentially there because of their belief in the rights of women and feminism and so on, they put their hatred of Israel above their duties to tell the truth about women. So that must, in and of itself, undermine their credibility for anything that they've said before or after. This is the reason, essentially, why we wrote this report, so that in 50 or 100 years' time, when historians look at this, none of them will be able to go along with this foul lie because of an impeccably documented report, which goes over 319 pages. And as you say, a lot of it is pretty hard to read, and the photos are hard to look at. And by the way, we could have used much more gory and gruesome photographs if we'd wanted to. There are several from the pathology department in Israel which just defy belief, frankly. And we didn't. There is an element of sort of taste and decency which we've had to impose on this, just generally because of our own, opinions, really. But what it comes down to, again and again, as I mentioned, is that the people who say that it was primarily directed against soldiers rather than civilians, completely untrue. What Hamas were trying to do were to, in their attacks on the IDF, were to prevent the IDF from counterattacking so that they could get on and do what they really wanted to do, which is the same thing that anti-Semites have wanted to do for the last 3,000 years, which is kill as many Jews as possible.
The Hamas-led attack on southern Israel on October 7th was a catastrophic act of terror that resulted in 1,182 deaths, over 4,000 injuries, and 251 hostages. The deadliest per capita terrorist attack, with just over 1 in every 10,000 Israelis killed, and the third overall deadliest terrorist attack in the world to date. Over 90% of those killed or taken hostage were Israeli citizens, including Jewish Israelis, Arab Israelis, and Bedouins. Citizens from 44 nations around the world were killed and taken hostage. Among the victims were 18 UK citizens, marking the largest loss of British lives in a Middle Eastern terror attack. In the wake of rising misinformation and deliberate efforts to distort the facts, British parliamentarians from the All-Party Parliamentary Group on UK-Israel sought to create an independent, accurate record of the events on October 7th and 8th. Chaired by Lord Roberts of Belgravia, this parliamentary panel worked to gather testimony and provide a clear, chronological account of the events, ensuring the full scale and impact of the attacks are properly documented. The collection of survivor testimonies, eyewitness statements, and expert analysis served to preserve historical accuracy, acting as a crucial evidence-based record in an era of denialism. The findings were formally presented to the British Parliament to ensure they reached the highest level of government attention. Well, joining me now is Lord Roberts himself. Thank you very much for joining me today. What motivated you to spearhead this independent report on the events of October 7th? And what was the primary goal of this effort?
Well, it's the report of the All-Party Parliamentary Group, and we had been, which, as the name implies, covers the British political spectrum, but also is from the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And we'd been very concerned, really from the 7th of October onwards, about the levels of denialism that were going on. We saw an obvious equation with the Holocaust denialism that's been plaguing us all for so long. And we wanted to get something out on the record that would allow future historians to fight against this. And also, we wanted to have a memorial to each of the individuals who died on that terrible day, because sometimes when an event becomes a historical event, like the 7th of October, the individual stories tend to get lost. So that was another primary motivation for the report.
Your report is very in depth. It's one of the most precise reports I've read so far. Tell me, what were some of the most disturbing findings from your investigation?
Well, I think the level of premeditation was something. The way in which some Hamas apologists make it out just to have been a sort of sudden spontaneous uprising, which became a bloodlust, and in the heat of the moment, terrible things happened. That's all completely untrue. That's the most terrible lie, and this report proves it. In fact, there was an enormous amount of premeditation for almost every crime that was committed, including taking baby incubators across the border into southern Israel because they intended to kidnap small children. And the ways in which they brought perfectly sized explosive devices that attach to the safe room doors of some Israeli safe rooms makes it clear also that they've been thinking up this and planning this and working out precisely what they were going to do for a very long time. And the idea, therefore, that it was just a sudden horror was the result of a pressure cooker kind of thing was not true at all. They actually got phrase books which had certain phrases translated into Hebrew, such as "spread your legs" and "take off your clothes" and so on, which, to me at least, clearly make it obvious that rape was premeditated as well.
One of the most shocking revelations in your report involves the youngest victim of October 7th, a 14-hour-old baby who was shot while in utero. Her mother, who was an Arab Israeli woman, was actually driving to the hospital to deliver her baby when she was shot in the stomach by Hamas terrorists. Now, while doctors were able to deliver the baby, she unfortunately tragically passed away 14 hours later from her wounds. How does such a harrowing detail impact the understanding of the brutality of the October 7th attacks?
Well, obviously, as a military historian, I try to look back to find equivalents, and you do get the bayoneting of pregnant women in the rape of Nanjing between December 1937 and the March of 1938. But really, you have to go back that far to find on any kind of large scale, and of course, the deaths of 1,182 people in one day on the 7th of October is a very large scale. This kind of level of utterly inhuman and disgusting depravity. It's very difficult to find historically. I've just written a book with David Petraeus, the American general, called Conflict last year, and we visited the stories of about 40 to 45 wars that have taken place between 1945 and Gaza, and nowhere did we find the kind of predetermined, deliberate massacres of that kind of level of of brutality. So it's really quite something that's quite unprecedented in recent history, at least.
Some aspects of your report are particularly difficult to confront, but they're essential to understanding the full scope of Hamas's atrocities, specifically the sexual violence against women that you've mentioned. Can you share what the report uncovers in that area?
A lot of it is very gory, very gruesome, and so on. But actually, some of the worst stuff we did keep out of the report because we weren't able to double check it. Everything in the report we absolutely know irrefutably to have taken place. And so we've erred consistently on the side of conservatism when it came to what we put in and what we left out. Um, and as you say, sexual violence and the premeditated desire to rape and humiliate and then murder Israeli women and on occasion men was truly monstrous. The chief pathologist's office was extremely helpful in this regard. Much of the photographic evidence can only point to one thing, which was that the terrorists wanted to enjoy themselves as they were murdering, and they wanted to take sexual pleasure from the process, and that they did on pretty much every one of the massacre sites. There is evidence of sexual of rape, essentially, prior to murder, and so that is another hugely depraved aspect of it. And by the way, one of the other things that was very depraved, which carried on for 6 months afterwards, was the International Women's Commission of the United Nations refusing to denounce this.
Staying absolutely silent.
They were absolutely silent. And so they put, these people who are essentially there because of their belief in the rights of women and feminism and so on, they put their hatred of Israel above their duties to tell the truth about women. So that must, in and of itself, undermine their credibility for anything that they've said before or after.
And yet many of these people still remain in their positions.
Promoted, quite a few of them have been promoted. Yes, absolutely. No, it's a sign of the moral decay of the United Nations, undoubtedly.
After presenting the findings to the British Parliament, I'm curious to hear from you. What were the reactions from lawmakers and other officials?
Very positive. This is one of the pleasing things. The Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, put out a supportive tweet. We're expecting one from number 10 Downing Street any minute. I've been stopped in the corridor in the House of Lords on literally dozens of occasions by members saying thank you, essentially, for this report. And I've been flooded with emails as well, especially from ordinary citizens in Israel. So, and there's been a lot of positive coverage in Denmark and Germany and here in Britain, and of course in Israel and in America. So overall, I'm very pleased with this. Of course, that disgusting thing called Twitter, which my friend Neil Ferguson described as the universal lavatory wall, has had some attacks on this report, calling it Zionist propaganda and claiming no rapes took place and so on. You can take that entirely for granted from Twitter, I think, though.
The London School of Economics recently released a book titled Understanding Hamas and Why It Matters, claiming that much of Hamas's actions on October 7th only targeted military objectives. Now, your report decisively disproves that narrative, highlighting that Hamas, in fact, targeted civilians, entire families in their homes, killing them, raping them, torturing them, dismembering them, and taking many hostage. Why do you think an institution like the London School of Economics would attempt to justify a terror attack that specifically targeted British civilians among the largest group of foreign casualties in a Middle Eastern terror attack?
It completely beggars belief, doesn't it? The London School of Economics is a respected institution, very respected, and yet it on its website actually in promoting this book claims, as one of the co-authors has written, that Hamas has essentially grown up as an organization and is now capable of differentiating between Jews and Zionists. Well, let me tell you, Sarah, they didn't make any such differentiation on the 7th of October. They wiped out Jews, they wiped out Zionists, they wiped out Gentiles, they wiped out Thai workers. It was just completely a sort of upswelling of loathing and resentment and hatred, which led to massacres which entirely failed to differentiate between certainly Zionists and Jews in the way that this disgraceful book, which is lowering the status of the London School of Economics for the way that it's supported it, and it's given a party to launch the book and so on. I think were I to have gone to the University of the London School of Economics, this is the moment to take away the funding and to treat it in the same way that Columbia was treated by the Trump administration.
Holocaust denial is a well-known phenomenon. Similarly, the massacre of October 7th has been subject to denial, despite overwhelming evidence, including footage recorded by the terrorists themselves, recorded on their own body cameras, GoPro cameras, uploaded themselves to social media, Telegram. And yet, how do you explain this continued denial of the atrocities of October 7th? Does it come down to just pure anti-Semitism?
Yes, I think it does. It's yet another mutation, metastasization of anti-Semitism. Of course, it is. I think the people who say that it never took place, in their heart of hearts, know perfectly well that it did, but they recognise that it's hurtful to Jews that such a thing can be said, and therefore they say it. This is the reason essentially why we wrote this report, so that in 50 or 100 years' time, when historians look at this, none of them will be able to go along with this foul lie because of an impeccably documented report which goes over 319 pages, and as you say, a lot of it is pretty hard to read, and the photos are hard to look at. And by the way, we could have used much more gory and gruesome photographs if we'd wanted to. There are several from the pathology department in Israel which just defy belief, frankly. And we didn't. There is an element of sort of taste and decency which we've had to impose on this, just generally because of our own, I don't know, opinions, really. But what it comes down to again and again, as I mentioned, is that the people who say that it was primarily directed against soldiers rather than civilians, completely untrue. What Hamas were trying to do were to, in their attacks on the IDF, were to prevent the IDF from counterattacking so that they could get on and do what they really wanted to do, which is the same thing that anti-Semites have wanted to do for the last 3,000 years, which is kill as many Jews as possible.
In your eyes, how can we combat anti-Semitism in the UK today?
Well, ultimately, of course, it's all down to education. That's always the best way to combat anti-Semitism. And I personally think that the best memorial to the Holocaust would be to have our school children go to Auschwitz in the same way that Israeli school children go. But that's a long-term thing. In the short term, we must just crush it. We must attack it wherever we see it. We must stop these endless hate marches that we get every single Saturday in London. You know, from the river to the sea, they shout. They show paragliders, placards with paragliders on. I mean, this is very clearly exterminationist hate speech, and we ought to ban it. We've got laws that prevent it. They're just not being used properly. We ought to clear out the Tentifada, that we've been seeing at Oxford and Cambridge and other universities, and which are intimidating to Jewish students there, of course. And we've got to be an awful lot tougher. I think the excellent work being done by the Community Security Trust in defending Jews, they've come up with a number of recommendations, and we should implement all of them. And this is a moment, this is a profoundly important moral moment where Britain has to be seen where it's standing. And instead, you have our Foreign Secretary denouncing Israel. You have our Foreign Secretary denouncing Israel, possible reason that they might be used against international law. You know, we are on the wrong side here of a struggle between civilization and barbarism, frankly, and that's something that makes me rather ashamed. I sit on a couple of think tank boards here in London, and I do think that they're very important. I think that the way in which they set out the parameters in which innovative thinking, political thinking takes place, makes them a real contribution to the whole of the polity. And so, what JCFA does, I think, is really important in this regard, and people should support it and listen to it. So congratulations on what you do, Sarah. I really think the more people that obviously read my report, but also engage politically and supportively, the better. And that's the kind of thing that your think tank and some of the ones in England are all about.
Lord Roberts, thank you very much for your support and for agreeing to speak with us today.
Thank you.